Yes.
Hello, everybody. Today I am joined by Jade, Ingrid, and Christy, and we are going to be discussing The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. And this will be a spoiler discussion. So if you haven't read the book and you don't want to be spoiled for anything, you probably want to click off. But just that heads up ahead of time. Before we get into our thoughts, though, I do want to know what everybody's expectations were going into this, because Ingrid, especially, I think you had heard some things before, and then it didn't quite, because this was not the first time you had picked this up as a result of those expectations. So I want to know everybody's expectations, and then I do think it'll be curious to see if our overall thoughts were affected by what our expectations were going in. But Ingrid, you can kick it off.
So I thought the marketing of this was kind of misleading, and also a lot of like the reviews for it, because because sometimes, I'm like, did I make this up in my head, right? So I went back on Goodreads to look to see like what people were saying. And I like one of the first reviews is like, oh, this is a love story between the devil and a girl. And I'm like, that is not what this is, And it's so misleading. But I also think that it wasn't just people reviewing it. I think the marketing kind of was like a little bit misleading. I think the fact that they tried to catch people that do like that sort of romance, and especially like, or almost like forbidden romance between a devil and a human, that would catch them right off the bat. But then you read this and that's not what it is. So that was one of my things.
And it's interesting because I didn't hear that about the book from V.E. Schwab, because I think that's where I mostly was seeing, I guess you could call it, marketing beforehand or hype beforehand. I was mostly just seeing her talk about the book, and I didn't see that as much. But it was interesting because you definitely aren't alone, because when people started to do reviews, I saw so many people saying, I thought it was in exactly what you described, and that's not what it was. So I'm so confused as to what was it, the publisher or art,
I don't know,
like early art
see,
reviews?
that's the thing too, that's why I was like, I looked back to see, maybe I made this all up in my head and it's not,
Yeah, you
but
definitely
maybe it
didn't.
was like early published, like people that read arcs and stuff that were kind of labeling it that, and then people just went with it and kept repeating it. So it, in my opinion, kind of caught on.
Yeah, it did. It definitely did, because I saw that same conversation. And then Jade, you kind of went in with no expectations, right? Oh, Jade, did your audio click out? Well, we'll get Jade. That was your level of expectations. It's just silence.
I think she's back yet.
Am I back yet?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're back. You're back.
My internet skipped 3 times already, so this is going to be fun.
Well, we'll segue if it happens again into something.
Yeah. So my expectations, I really had no expectations other than I've liked V.E. Schwab's writing in the past, and so I was optimistic about it. I guess one good thing about being like away from the bookish internet for a couple of years is I didn't see any of that marketing, and I didn't see anyone's reviews. I had a vague idea. I thought I had a vague idea what this book was about, but I really didn't. I just knew it was a book about like a special girl, and that it's a book that V.E. Schwab had in her head for like a really long time before writing it. And that's pretty much all I knew about it. So I went in with a pretty clean slate, but just being optimistic that I was going to like it. I didn't know what the reviews were like and how it was received afterwards. Like, it sounds like maybe there were mixed opinions and stuff after it came out. So, but yeah, I really didn't know anything about it. So I was just cautiously optimistic. And I mean, optimistic mostly based on enjoying her previous books. I think there's one V.E. Schwab book that was just meh for me. Other than that, I love her books.
And Christy, how was it for you?
So it's funny that you mentioned that you heard about it being marketed as a romance and how it's like definitely not a romance. Because like, I guess like the reviews that I've heard, like I haven't seen the ones where people actually talk about it being a romance. I've only seen the ones where people insist that like, that's wrong. It is not a romance.
So then people took them all down.
So then in my head, there was like no romance kind of thing at all. So when I read it, I was like surprised, like, oh, you know, there is actually something that's like going on between her and the darkness character. So it was like really unexpected for me. But as for my enjoyment expectations, like honestly, I was like I could go any way with this. So I really like had no idea, because I have enjoyed a lot of her books before, but then there are also ones that I didn't like. And like I could see this one going either way. Like, oh, it could be something that's just like so deeply moving and like I get so attached to. But I think that's kind of like a really precarious ledge to like balance on, because sometimes it can go a little like too far. And then at that point I would be like, okay, I'm kind of tired of this now. Like, you know, so I could have seen it go either of those directions.
I had a kind of similar thing. So I've really enjoyed V.E. Schwab's works. Similar to Jade, I was very optimistic just purely because it's V.E. Schwab, and I really enjoy so many of the books by her that I've read. And I like her writing style, even if it's not a plot that's probably going to be as gripping to me. I've never had a complete miss. So I was optimistic in that sense. And then Ingrid, you know, I hadn't seen everybody talking about it being a romance. I just saw that it was this kind of sort of what Jade said, but I think I heard a pretty accurate description of this girl who is destined to be forgotten, and then one day somebody remembers her. And I think that I spent so much time deciding whether I wanted to read it or not, because thematically, I didn't think I was going to connect to it at all. I'm not really somebody who is like, but what if we don't leave our mark? And what if people forget us? And there's even a quote in the book about comparing, you know, if a tree falls, but there's nobody around, does it make a sound? And how that's kind of the question of, if you don't leave a mark, then did you even really live life? And can you even sense what's real anymore? And things like that. And part of me is like, I just don't think about life in that way very often. Like, and some people really connect to that, and the idea of being forgotten and not having any kind of legacy is maybe too dramatic of a word, but not having any kind of impact, it's something that deeply affects them. And I'm not really like that. So I didn't think that I was going to be all that drawn by this book and moved by it the way a lot of other people were. But then I saw, once it kind of had its peak popularity, then you start to see the criticisms, and a lot of the criticisms seemed valid, but not the kind of things that I thought would deter me from it. So I'm like, I just feel like I have so many thoughts in my head as to what this is going to be. So I waited years before picking it up, because usually V.E. Schwab releases are pretty much immediate for me to pick up. So now that those were all of our expectations laid out, how did those expectations, how were they met with what your thoughts were actually? Just kind of overall general thoughts. Would you say the expectations led you to like the book more than you thought you would, less than you thought you would? And Christy, we'll have you start. Actually, Jade, your internet looks good right now, so maybe we'll have you start as you take a drink from your cup. Oh, you're muted, I think.
And I think she's frozen now as well.
Oh no. Just destined to not let her. See, she's having to face this like Addie, you know, if nobody remembers or hears. Anyway.
Am I back?
Jade, yeah, you're back. What were your overall thoughts?
I haven't had this issue before. I don't know what's going on. I mean, they pretty much met my expectations. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I really love this book, and I think that my expectations were right to be optimistic and excited about it. So yeah.
Yay. That's always nice. Short and sweet. Ingrid, since you did pick it up more than once, you can comment too on your overall thoughts from both reading experiences.
I think I'm the odd man out, because I really didn't like this, like at all. Like, I think I didn't like Addie as a character, and this is all you get is Addie and her story, and I just didn't connect with her, not even a little bit. So I really, by the end of this, I was hate reading it, because I needed to know what was happening. Yeah, for sure. Because then I was like, I thought about it. I'm like, I DNF'd it at first. I should have went with my gut instinct on this and just never read it. But I will say that even though I didn't like it, it is a book that I keep like thinking about because I'm like, I will think, oh, I think Addie was just like whiny and wanted people to remember her, and she had all this opportunity to like do something, right? And she just kept on, oh, I hope someone remembers me. Like, I want someone to remember me. And I'm like, just like, at the whole time, I was like dying. And so I do think about it, the fact that it's like, I know I really dislike her. But anyway, so the whole time I was thinking, yeah, but what if that was you? Like, what if that happened to you? Would you really just go out gallivanting in the world, or would you really want to try to make a connection? I would like to think I'm not like that self-centered, but who knows? But yeah, I really didn't. No.
That
I
is
know I'm
not
being
how
harsh, and you guys really like this, but I just like I didn't connect with her. I think that is the root of my dislike of the book because it's all about her,
And Henry.
And he like watching paint dry, really. I just felt so disconnected
See, and
with
this
him
is why
too.
I was so for anybody that ends up watching this, we tried to keep our thoughts to ourselves before because we kind of buddy read it, but we were also trying to withhold from saying too much because we wanted. So we have no idea that Ingrid, or at least I didn't have any. I had an inkling.
I had
when
an
you're
inkling.
Like, based off, you're like, are all of you done yet? Kind of. I'm curious what you all think. It had like a negative air to it, but I don't think I realized. So Christy, I'll let you say something in a minute, but I just want to respond to you, Ingrid, before I forget that I feel not opposite in that I can understand if you don't connect with the character and you don't like the character, but I thought so much of the beginning of the book in her past was so brutal with the way in which life was shown, having this conundrum is an understatement, but this issue, I was like, gosh, the part where what was his name? Remy, I think. When he doesn't remember her, that really hurt. I felt so bad for her when he thinks that she was, a lady of the night, and he just like gives her coins and he's all ashamed. It was like she finally had that connection, and then it was so she's just like she's paint on the wall, you know what I mean? I was like, oh, that sucks. It just I didn't think I didn't necessarily connect with the themes for her. I actually weirdly almost think I connected to Henry's thematic elements of his character arc more, but I did find I was more impacted by her having everyone forget her constantly than I thought I would be. So it is funny that we kind of had the direct opposite.
Yeah.
Christy, where did you fall on overall thoughts?
So I cheated a little bit because I already knew what Ingrid thought because I watched her wrap up. And I think like half the video was her ranting about Addie LaRue, which was really great. So my thing about this book and V.E. Schwab's writing in general is that, like, when I first read her, I read like The Archived and Vicious, and I really loved the writing style in those. But then I think, like, as I mentioned, like there's a point at which, like, I know, and in this book as well, like the writing was very beautiful in the beginning, but at some point it hit like a threshold for me where it just like overstayed its welcome, like this kind of writing style. So by that point, it was just getting kind of repetitive and tedious for me to get through. And that was like all I could end up noticing was kind of like, and like the repeated metaphors and similes and stuff like that. So I ended up just feeling like kind of lukewarm about it because there are things that I really did enjoy. Like some of the writing was like, when it was really good, it was really good. But then other times, it just felt like, like you don't have to keep pushing this, about how she has stars on her face. Like, okay, we get it. She has 7 freckles. We know already. And like another one of her writing things was always comparing everything to punctuation marks. Like, I think it was really
I didn't even remember that.
It was really like poignant in the beginning where it's like she wanted her life to be like she didn't want her life to be a period. She wanted to be a ellipses or something like that, like something that keeps going, right? And I'm like, oh, like that, you know, that's really beautiful. But then she kept going, like it was a question mark, it was an exclamation mark, and I'm like, okay, I kind of, you know, like I guess I just don't like having metaphors beaten over my head. It just kind of like you hit a point of diminishing returns at that point.
The accountant is coming through.
I don't know. I audiobooked it, so I don't know if maybe that helped mask some of that or I just don't pay. I mean, it's very possible I just didn't pay enough attention to like really notice that, but I did not notice those, like that it was repetitive. I didn't notice the I remember that sentence with the ellipses because I thought the idea of that was like really pretty or beautiful, but I didn't remember that
got brought back.
punctuation. Yeah, punctuation is the word I was looking for. I didn't remember that happened multiple times. That's really funny.
It's like one of the things when I notice it, I can't not notice it anymore, and it ends up just like affecting my enjoyment while reading, which is really unfortunate.
And I was
gonna say, I'm really curious if I had read it physically, like with my eyes, if I would have seen it and like remembered it. I don't know. I'm so curious.
So I don't disagree, Christy. I really like her writing. I think the diminishing return concept came, to use a metaphor or a simile to, you know, describe the frustration with them. I think that point for me came later. I did find, because there's certain things that bug you that don't necessarily bug me. Because you were talking about how sometimes instead of using the word and, she'll have a comma and then whatever the next adjective is.
Yeah.
And we were having a conversation about that because for me, I really appreciate the flow of a sentence, the flow of an overall paragraph, and the amount of sentences within a paragraph as it's going through. How does it build the point and build the scene? So like the rhythm is what I think I refer to it as, the rhythm of the sentence. I really like, and I think that for someone else, it's just like, why did she keep doing this? And I do think, though, there are authors that will overuse these concepts, and it's not adding rhythmic value, I'll say. It's just that's the thing they kind of revert to constantly. And an editor maybe should be like, maybe vary the sentence structure up here a little bit. But I don't disagree that kind of later in the book, I was like, maybe we can either vary it up or cut a little. Because toward the end, I'm like, you established so well. In my opinion, I thought she established so well, unlike Ingrid, how awful it was. And I think she used similes and metaphors to establish that. And then just like the blunt reality of things. So it was so well established that I'm like, I get it. I don't need you to keep trying to find ways to describe it to me because it's been described and I understand. And I kind of just want to keep going now. That said, though, I think it didn't bother me quite as much as you. My thing was, I ended up feeling so much more impacted by this book than I was expecting to. There was a number of moments that really hit, but weirdly, the ending kind of didn't land. I didn't hate the ending, but I didn't love it either. So it was kind of, I don't think it took away from the really impactful scenes for me, but it did make it so that the book as a whole didn't end up, I mean, I would say it's one of my favorite, it is one of my favorite adult fantasy anyway, standalones currently, because of those really impactful moments. I got very emotional about them, but the book as a whole, I think, wasn't perfect for me. But speaking of notable moments, I kind of want to know, Ingrid, what were some of the ones where you're like, I hate her? Because my notable moments are going to be like, oh, wow, this part really moved me.
I will say, I will comment on the writing. I enjoyed it. Like, I like the way she writes. I think it was beautiful. And I will say, like, the beginning of it was a lot better because you're right. It does get kind of old towards the end. But there are definitely some parts of the book in the beginning, especially, that I was like, oh, I'm enjoying this. My issue is that I guess she had such a long time, like 300 years to get over it. You know what I mean?
Get over it? Oh my God.
Well, yeah, because it's like, I understand that she was like, she wanted connection, but at what point do you say, okay, like this is not happening. Maybe I should try something different instead of like going from person to person to person trying to find this connection that she's just not gonna find, right? Like, she dates people, she meets them, like, every single day, and it's like, and I don't know, how did the logistics of that happen too? Like, because apparently, like, when she closes the door, they forget her, but then
Nobody
she's like,
has to go to the bathroom, basically,
Yeah.
for their
yes,
entire
right?
date.
Like, no
Yeah,
one
that is
leaves
one
the
thing
room
you kind of
ever.
have to.
Yeah, just forget about that. But yeah, I guess and this wasn't even about Addie. I think this was the way that V. Schwab chose to do this. Like, the one part of the book that I got like so excited, I was like, oh my God, something's happening, which was when she gets like she tries to do something, which is when she's like a spy for the Allied forces, I think.
Oh, and that
But
was
then
very
we
much
see
not much of a plot.
just look like Luke or Darkness or whatever, like, going to rescue her, and I'm like, okay. So that's when I was like, F this, I don't want to read this anymore, because I got so excited that like some plot was gonna happen, something, and it just didn't.
Yeah, the
So I
plot
guess
is
that,
basically, doesn't it suck when people don't remember you? So
yeah, that's it. And
she could have written
I
a
think
whole
that
book
was
about her being a spy.
Yeah,
right.
that would have
then
been
Like,
really
anything
cool.
else, like, it was wars, famine, racism, like,
Mhm.
all these things happened in 300 years, and Addie is going from like France to America, back to France, to like, I'm just like, I can't do this, and I get it, like, Europe is beautiful, I would like explore every inch of the place if I could, but she just doesn't. She's just like so
Well,
worried
she
about
doesn't.
being.
Sorry,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I
No,
was
no,
gonna
go ahead.
say, she doesn't really travel much of her own accord. It's like Luke whisks her off the second she starts to be like, okay, I'm kind of comfortable here, except for the part with the spy thing, which got
Yeah.
just brushed under the rug pretty quickly. But
Who cares
because
about plot?
that was one thing I was wondering. I was like, oh, are we gonna see her like travel the world and get to see all these different beautiful places and cultures and stuff? But the book, I think, at least early on, established pretty well that even though there's not, TSA and things like that, it's really hard for her to get from point A to point B. Even when they show the woman when she's trying to stay in that room and the lady forgets that she's paid for the room and then she gets kicked out of the room, all that stuff.
Right.
But I think that him whisking her off whenever, one, he was trying to make her life worse, or just when he was messing with her, it was very much like it was kind of a plot convenience. Like, oh, we need her to move so that the setting is different now. But yeah, there wasn't as much. It was. I know what you're saying about it's like kind of all about her and less about everything that's transpired in the last 300 years of her life.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just don't think that was really like the point of the book. Like, she wrote it to like do all of that. I think it would have been cool to see that, but I think like, she just really wanted to focus on the themes of living forever and being forgotten and not, and not making your mark on the world, which I guess like if she did do those things, she could have made a mark.
Right. And the thing is, like, for her I was thinking about it because I was like literally thinking about this. She could have been a spy, right? She could have, because no one would remember her, because no one really, like, you're not supposed to know like who a spy is, their name and stuff. And she could have just done a lot of different things that could have like, then she could have been remembered by the entire world, right? If she helped in some sort of way, like during war or whatever. That, even if no one remembers her, like, she would know that she helped, just like she knows about all the art that she's like part of,
Yeah, and you're right that was that there was an attempt there with that when she decided like I have to do something to help in this war, and then that plot wasn't really. I feel like a lot of the plots of like, look at painters are painting her was more emphasized than her impact, because she did kind of impact the war, but otherwise not as much. I do have a random question, but I promise it's relevant. Are you competitive or not, Ingrid?
Yes.
You're okay, because I'm very competitive. So when you were like, well, she has so much time to get over it, part of me is like, but I need her to defeat Luke. Like, I need her to find a way to get him, because every time he's like, just give in. And I'm like, don't give in. And so for me, it's just like that also.
And I thought about it too, in the sense that like at the end, can I talk about the end? Yeah, right? We're talking spoilers.
Of course. Right.
At the end, of the book where she gives in to Luke, but not really, right? She wants to save Henry. I thought that was good, but I almost like she insists, right, that Luke doesn't love her, but I, in my head, was thinking that it's not like that he does love her and she just doesn't realize it, right? And because yeah, he did mess with her for a while, but like I feel
For
like
a
they
while.
were kind of like yeah, for 300 years.
300 years.
Her whole
Yeah.
existence.
But like maybe it is like I was thinking too that they're kind of like toxic for each other in because he cursed her or granted her wish, however you want to look at it, and then he didn't realize that she was going to live forever and she wasn't going to give in to what he wanted her to do. But then at some point they became each other's only other person. So then I'm like thinking like, does he actually love her or not?
I feel like not at all. I don't think so at
I don't know.
all. Because in my head,
You didn't think so?
There's that quote about when she's like, if you really loved me, you would let me go. And he's like,
Yeah.
well, it's
Yeah, that's
because I
true.
love you. And then she's like, you have mistaken love for possession. Because he just
Yes.
wanted to,
But do you think that she
I think
loved Henry?
No.
I don't
No, right?
necessarily think she loved Henry. I think she loved finally having a connection with another person again.
Mhm.
But I think, and there's comments, but I think she might say that she loves him, but I think there's things in the narrative that hint at that it's less that she loves him and maybe they wouldn't have even lasted for forever, but she got to live again. And life is like partly us having connections with other people around us. But I thought Luke was, because I'm like, definitely no, he's horrible. He's made her life miserable. I think.
Yeah, he has. He's like, I guess, I don't know, maybe in the back of my head, I was like still thinking that this was a love story. So then I kept trying to like
frame it that way, you think?
yes, like almost like try to talk myself, because I did see what she was saying in terms of like him just wanting to break her, right? That's ultimately what he wanted. But then they started to get together. And did he do that because he knew that she would kind of like hate herself for giving in, even if it was just sexually?
I do get what I think something that you're saying that I think would be interesting is that he's not human. So his concept of love and connection, he doesn't like his whole existence has been in isolation. So he might consider it in his mind to be that, but it like by our definition, it's not. And that's why I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but I feel like V. Schwab would write an interesting, it doesn't really matter what mythological being it is. I think she could do fae or elves or any kind of being that lives for a long time. I think she could do it, especially with her like sense of wickedness in a lot of her stories. I think she could write a really good fae or elf story. I mean, that was something that came to mind here. And then maybe you could explore more of those
like immortality.
I guess you could, the concept of how they love in different circumstances. But I think for me, it's
I think if you live forever, it's like, does anything matter anymore? Like, because
right, that was that was one of the things I found really interesting about this book. I mean, the whole idea that because Luke can live forever, can he actually love? And then that in turn like applies to Addie, because then can they only love each other because but really he still has lived way longer than she has. It just puts you on totally like different levels, right? And it kind of what Elle was, I think, talking about, or made me think about like Lord of the Rings, and like, can a human and an elf really be in a relationship, because they're like totally different, not levels, but because like one's basically immortal. Their like a human life is like a blink of an eye for somebody else, or for like an elf from Lord of the Rings. And can you really love something that doesn't last that long in the grand scheme of like your life? And I don't know, that's what I found to be interesting about their relationship.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Ingrid. I was just going to say, I mean, I love my doggy and all. Of course, every video I've got to bring up animals, but I mean, animals generally, depends on the pet. Some pets live a really long time, but animals are like, in the grand scheme of a human's life, if you get to live a long, healthy life, they're only here for a bit. But I'm like, they've got it figured out. They're pure and open with their feelings, and they show love and affection and joy so easily, and they're not weighed down. But I mean, I'm not saying that like the comparison between a human and an elf is the same as like a human and a dog. You know, I know that's not exactly the same thing.
I
But
was thinking that.
yeah, but actually thinking like human existence. I mean, a lot of us have our grandparents for a short amount of time. I know it's not, obviously that's not romantic love, but like that's still a thing to like a human being that you love, even though most of us don't have our grandparents for the length of our lives, you know, and there's people in our lives that we love. And so I think exploring the concept of meaning in relationships and meaning in connection, even when one person is going to get to live for a different, like you're only having pieces of your life with overlapping is what I'm trying to say. But you can still love, I think also just knowing, you know, these last few years, my dad died, my grandma died. So just having these people that are gone now and then knowing I have so much more life without them, but then it like kind of makes you, it's an interesting question. I think Ingrid, you brought it up about, or Jade, the idea of in this book, does anything have meaning if you live forever? Can you really have love if you live forever? What does that even mean? And how does that change? And I think even just seeing something for a short amount of time and then it's gone and knowing you live, you're going to live more of your life without this person. To me, it's like, it makes that mean so much more, not less. I think that was something that I thought the book captured well, but it's so interesting because this book is so, it elicits such a different range of feelings in different people. So I think this is a fun conversation. I do feel bad because Ingrid, I cut you off a second ago, but I also feel like we haven't got to hear from Christy in a bit.
No, go ahead, Christy. So. I don't know what I was gonna say anyway.
Well, like I was gonna say, like for that, regardless of whether it was love or not, like personally, I don't believe it was love. It was just like they were just drawn to each other because they were the only two people that can like understand each other. But regardless of whatever it was, I still really enjoyed their dynamic because I just love that kind of like toxic dynamic to read about. I always mention this. Like I love reading about it because it's like it's so interesting to explore, and it just gives me feelings.
Well, it's a safe place to explore it when you're looking at it through the lens of a book as opposed to experiencing it.
Yeah, oh for sure. Like
yeah.
Not in real life, please. But I think we were talking about notable moments. And I think for me, like the most notable moment wasn't, okay, so relating back to like the theme, but the part that I connected with wasn't the part where she was like, oh, I'm afraid that people are going to forget me and I'm not going to, like, people are not even going to know that I exist in the world. But I think what I connected with was what kind of initially brought her to feeling that way was her living her entire life in that little tiny village, Vion, I think it was called, and how she was born in the village. The expectation is that she's just going to grow up here. She's only going to know like the same 100 or so people in her life. She's going to die. And the whatever, the plot of like her grave is like already planned out for her. Like she knows that this is where she's going to die. And I think like that is the part that I connected with more, because it's like thinking that you're being confined to like this tiny place, or just not being able to like branch out in your life. And it just reminds me of, I know you don't like SpongeBob. And it just reminds me of that GIF or like that scene in SpongeBob where it was like the fish, he wakes up, he like has the same expression. He sits in his like his car on the commute to work, same expression. He's at work, and then he comes home on the commute again, and then at the end of the night, he's just like staring out the window in the exact same pose, exact same expression. And I know like SpongeBob is silly, but that part is like pretty, I don't know, like pretty deep. Because as someone who works a 9 to 5 every day, I'm like, I can relate to that. And it's scary to think like, you know, that's all you're going to do with your life.
Yeah.
And I think bringing up the beginning is good, because that really pulled me into, I was talking about earlier how how much it sucked her life and the choices that she had. Because I feel like talking about marketing again, the marketing, I thought it was just like, I want to live forever. I didn't realize it was, I do not want to be trapped in this loveless marriage, forced to like my life is confined. I mean, the idea that like I would rather not live at all, but if there is an option where I can live and this isn't my path, then I would like that. And it's not like her path was like, oh, it'd be pretty nice. It's like, no, when it's so not a life that she wants, it wouldn't probably be a great life. So I really connected with that beginning as well. A notable moment, because you brought up her grave is essentially already laid out for her. That was a part that hit me, is when she went back and saw her father's gravestone. And I think she notes that they didn't even say anything about him or his work, his artistry. It said something like his life was condensed to a set of dates or something like that and a slab of stone. And I was like, oh man, that, I don't know why, but that hit harder than a lot of the other moments about what does life even mean and what's a life well lived. The idea, it wasn't so much that he wasn't remembered, but just that his entire existence was reduced to the set of dates. I was like, ah, man, that just, I think I have a healthy level of, I don't really matter in the grand scheme of the planet, but the idea of like, I think in a weird way, it's the idea of someone she loved and her witnessing that that's all their life was reduced to. Like, that made me sad, because that was a person that she cared about. And then because we're on the topic of notable moments and her parents, when her parents don't remember her, I know it's one of the first things that happens, but man, when they don't remember her, I'm like, I can't imagine, because I love my parents. I can't imagine if my mom didn't know me anymore, or if my husband didn't know me, who's not a parent, obviously. But if the people that I care about most in life don't remember me anymore, I'm like, I feel like I would have called it then and be like, never mind, just take me, dissolve my soul. It's fine. I don't want to do this anymore. So I was just gutted for her right from the get-go, I think. Were there other notable moments, Jade? Were there some that stood out to you?
Yes, I have a funny one, but before I do the funny one, so I also at the beginning just felt so horrible for her. Like, the idea of all the people you've known your whole life, just like not being able to remember you anymore and not being able to reestablish any sort of connection. Like, I don't know, that was so heartbreaking. Like, her best friend didn't remember her. Like, that was really.
She was legitimately a danger to her children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Isabel, right?
And then, but I also, so the beginning, that was very heartbreaking, but it was also the most interesting part too, like seeing her figure out the rules to her new life and like what she can and can't do. Because they were doing flashbacks back and forth between the two times, and I like did not care about the present time. I just wanted to know about the past timeline and like what happened to her and how she like figured out like what you were talking about, where she couldn't get a room at a hotel because the lady would forget that she'd already paid. Like, I was like, what is she gonna do? So like, to me, that was like so interesting. A funny notable moment. I told you guys I went into this without really knowing anything about it. When Henry remembers her, I was like, shut the front door. What just happened? I did not know that was going to happen, which is so silly, but I
had a feeling you were going to bring that up, so I didn't want to bring it up first, but that was probably the most unexpected moment for me, in that it made me really emotional, even though I knew it was going to happen because I knew that was part of the plot. I was surprised how long it took us to get there, but because at that point it had established so much, like, look how awful her life is, that when he remembered, and it was really like, I remember, and when it was repeating it a bunch, I almost started crying. I knew it was coming too, and if you knew it was coming ahead of time, like, you can feel the setup for that scene, like he's gonna carry with the book and stuff. So I knew, but I was like reorganizing my shelves. I was listening to the audiobook at that moment, and I was like, like, I was so taken aback by how much it made me feel in that moment. But it's funny that you were like, what? Your mind
I was like, plot twist! Oh my
god. Plot twist is the thing everybody
else already knew.
See, I've
Yeah,
heard
I think
so much about this book that
yeah.
like that is the one thing that again I always hear people talk about. Like she suddenly one day meets a guy and he remembers her. But like the way that people mention that in my head, I was thinking like, oh, he's gonna like recognize her, like, and be like, I remember you, and something like
Such
that.
a kind of goofy scene.
And then but it turns out like she steals a book, and I was like, this. It was, even though I knew it was coming, it was still kind of unexpected. I was like, this is different than what I thought.
It is interesting. It's also sad too when once that he knows her curse, when anytime they go anywhere, she has to consistently where his friends will look and just be like, "You didn't tell us that you were bringing your girlfriend," when they had just seen her and stuff. And she's like, "Yeah," and he's looking at it like, "Oh, this." I felt bad for his situation too. His situation sucked. And it's so weird how it's the opposite of hers, where basically everybody sees in him what they need, the voids in themselves, like they view in him like, oh, you're the missing piece. And so nobody actually sees him, even though they do, and it's filled with adoration, but it's like something, a veil. Yeah, nobody actually sees what's beneath. And I was like, oh, that would suck. I don't know. That would suck in its own way. Ingrid, though, I feel like you were gonna add something a second ago.
Oh, I was just gonna say that was another thing that I think the description and stuff of this book like did a disservice, because if you read the description, like it always already spoils the fact that someone is going to remember her. And
I mean, when
people
I
are
was
like,
surprised by that, I was like, I should have known that was coming, because that's like a logical place for the plot to go.
Yeah.
But like, I didn't know. But I
Yeah.
agree, it like
And
doesn't happen until like halfway in. That's
Yeah.
totally spoiler zone.
It is. And I thought that did a disservice too. But I will say, you guys were talking about the beginning of the book. That was the part of the book that I enjoyed. Like when I started reading it, I think we sent a couple messages that I was like, oh, I'm glad I'm reading this. Like I was really into it, because I agree. I like the fact that she wanted to escape from this like monotonous life that she didn't want to have with someone that she didn't love and stuff. But it just went downhill from there. But
I feel bad that it went downhill. And so you thought Henry, we haven't talked about Henry too much, but you thought you might as well have watched paint drying, I think is what you said.
I just I guess I shouldn't, so I was like thinking about this, and I have to phrase this in a way that like I acknowledge the fact that, like, Henry is mentally ill. Like he was not someone that was well, right? Like if you know the spoil,
Right.
he did what he tried to do. But I just thought the fact that he like, he had a good life and he had all this like things going for him, and he just has this like void in himself where he feels like he's not enough. And I just, and he's like, oh, she broke up with me because she doesn't love me, and he's like, that was why he did what he did. I just couldn't, the thing with Henry, I guess, is I couldn't connect to him at all. Like I don't ever see myself doing that. And I just thought he was like he was in the book for the sake of like having that thing happen, right? Like someone needed to remember her, and she ends up saving him, and then there's that conflict with Luke. And I think he just, like, it wasn't about him personally as a character, it just needed to happen. So I
I think
didn't enjoy his character.
Henry's struggle, I think what you were describing about that feeling of like, I'm not enough, I'm never enough, and I'm never enough for everyone else, that I connected with that feeling. And so I think that a lot of this book does come down for a lot of people. Not there's of course other things people can criticize and whatnot, but Henry, for me, I think I connected to as a character more than Addie.
Yeah.
Even though Addie's motivations and reasons for what she did made a lot of sense to me, because I wouldn't want to deal with that either. The feeling of that, he can't really control when he's depressed. He can't really pinpoint why he's depressed. There are other things that can expand it and make it worse. But it's just this thing that's always present, and how you come to terms with that. And then also just when the feeling of like, I'm never enough for anyone else. I think that feeling in, because, growing up, a lot of us learn that even though our parents love us a lot, hopefully they do, the rest of the world makes you realize pretty quickly, like, you're not that special. We don't really care that much about you. And I think that's like a thing that you learn as you get older. But when you put a lot of effort into something, whether it's a friendship or even if it's something that doesn't have to do with like a relationship with another person, but you're putting a lot into your work and you're just continuously overlooked or unappreciated or even put down, I feel like the way in which that can sort of make a person spiral and that negative self-talk is something I imagine a lot of people connect to. I wouldn't say it's like my identity perfectly, but I think I connect to that more than Addie. I'm curious for Christy and Jay, would you say you connected more to his struggles or would you say hers?
I don't know. Probably his, in the sense that I'm not like.
Oh no.
She froze.
Christy, I don't know how long. We'll let Jade go again if you're. Oh, Jade, you're back.
Oh, she's
okay,
my
you're
back. Okay.
Yeah.
I was saying that I think I connect more to Henry because I definitely have like negative self-talk sometimes and know that feeling of not being, and I think that's a really common like anxiety feeling that people have, versus Addie is very like adventurous and wants to go like live a vibrant life, and I'm very cozy being a homebody and like reading books all day and not like seeing the world. So in that sense, I think I definitely connected to Henry more, but I also still liked Addie.
Yeah. I think if there was more to add, you can add more after, but Christy, do you want to say what it was like for you?
So I mentioned before, like the beginning part of Addie, that's the part I really connected with, where she didn't like, she was scared of like living and just dying in this small piece of existence. But when Henry was introduced and then he talked about like, especially his relationship with his parents and how like he dreads going back to visit them because he knows like no matter like what he does, they always have something to like criticize him for, and how he doesn't feel like he can't ever meet their expectations. And that's just like in Asian culture, that's just like very like expected kind of thing that I think a lot of kids experience growing up. So really, I really connected with him there. But I think when like him, especially him and Addie together, I didn't like those parts at all, because it just like we said before, like we don't think it was love, and their relationship with each other was just very like manic pixie dream girl and manic pixie dream boy. Like that's what they were to each other, and that's fine. And I like that, you know, it kind of shows that, but I think it just went on for a little too long. So it's
It
like
is interesting that he's like the exact opposite of Luke. Because in a sense, he's her only other option. There is the question of do they only love each other because of the fact that they're the only two people that can, you know? But like Remy, I think the reason that part hit me so hard is because like Remy seemed like somebody who genuinely had this sort of kindred spirit with Addie. And what a sad thing that, you know, Luke stole that from her basically. But I think the difference with Henry a little bit was that as far as the difference between him and Luke, there's plenty, but a big one as far as how their relationship formed was that it was like based off of I feel like this is not a great way to word this, but like a mutual need for connection. And it wasn't a possessive need because they genuinely wanted to get to know the other person they want. Because that was a big thing for her too, is like, when's that moment going to happen where he doesn't want to spend time with me and then this is over and I've ruined this? And that concept for her, as opposed to Luke, who was like expectant, like, well, come on, I know you're going to eventually come here once I've broken you down enough. Which is like awful. But the thing you were talking about where with his parents are the ones that are saying, you know, basically you're never enough. Even just taking his parents and expanding that, I think a lot of people face that same feeling based off of how society treats them for a number of reasons, whether it be, a person's gender or their sexuality or their race, that feeling of when it's coming from me, it's never enough. But if it's someone else, then it is because of XYZ reasons. And you only see in me the things to critique, but in these other people, because you kind of see that with his siblings. He has the other siblings are like perfect children, and he's the one that can never be enough. And then when he actually faces it, it's almost like somebody finally gets to have pretty privilege. You ever seen people online talk about like, I was an ugly duckling and then I got pretty when I got older. Now I see what everybody's talking about. It's like he got that where suddenly they were like, you're amazing. Everything you do is great.
Yeah, even when he like stopped his program or whatever, the parents were like, oh, that's okay. Like, you know, I'm sure like you have other like, other plans and your time is better spent elsewhere. And I'm like, wow, is this what support feels like?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And that stark difference to see the world on the other side, but that it's not actually rooted in him as a person and his thought process or his efforts. It's
I was just thinking maybe like, what if I guess his parents, I didn't think about that part, but I could, I just didn't, but I was thinking maybe he like just his friends like really like him, right? Like that one friend that wants to write the thesis on Addie, I forget her name. B. Yeah.
She was adorable.
She was an amazing friend. So then I was thinking like maybe I know he had a relationship that broke down, but sometimes that happens, right? Like I think the person went up to him and said like, we're just not in love. And that's why I keep going back to the fact that I think he has like some issues that he needs like therapy to treat and not like
right.
And that's why I was like, I have to be careful how I talk about him because I don't think what he feels is invalid, but I do think that he has people that do love him and do think that he's an amazing person. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, he needs therapy, not the devil.
Not to make tax that will,
It is interesting too. Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. No, the part when you find out like from that he made a pact with Luke and like that moment, I actually felt for Addie. Because like you could almost feel her sense of like dread. Like what did you do when she finds out?
I like how none of us have brought up the fact that he's dying. Like he only has so much time. That was the trade-off. He gets to live a good life, quote unquote. But for it's just going to be short. So it's like the opposite of her situation. But his life sucks too because nobody's actually seeing him. When I found out he was dying, I'm like, no, dang it, this guy is the worst. Luke sucks a lot.
I think it just shows obviously. Like how desperate he was at that moment that he'll trade anything just to like feel that
enough
recognition and validation like his entire life just to feel it for a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's devastating. And I mean, I think it's really sweet, Ingrid, that even though you didn't love the book or connect, you found it boring, that you do care so much about, how you discuss him and everything, because I think a lot of people, it really does just kind of come down to I liked it or I didn't like it. And I feel like it's really sweet that you're so considerate. But also I want you to still feel like you can be open if you found him to be unbearable.
Like I'm a nurse, right? So I see like, especially when I worked in the ER, I see mental illness all the time. Like even if I don't have the issues myself, but it's not like you can't know, like you've never felt it, like you don't know how it actually feels, but you can sympathize and empathize with the person even though you don't know how it actually feels, if that makes sense.
Right. And I think that the book maybe I think it could have been trimmed a little on Addie's end and we could have spent a little bit more time with Henry. And I wonder if that would have balanced out a little bit better. Do you think, I'm curious if there's anything else anybody wants to add, that's you feel free to do so, but do you think that this would have been more impactful had her and Henry not had a romantic relationship? And if it was just like this beautiful friendship, do you think that would have resonated with more people? Or do you think people would have inevitably just been like shipping them and then been sad that they don't hook up?
That would have been me. I would have been sad if they didn't hook up.
I think I would have liked if it wasn't a romantic relationship because that was another. I remembered what I was going to say way before. The one thing I also didn't connect with Addie on was that it is sad that like she doesn't have anyone left, right? She can't connect with anyone. But it's almost like she wanted a romantic relationship. She wasn't looking for friendship or like a sense of family. It was almost like every person she met and hooked up with, it was like a romantic thing, you know?
Yeah,
And
that's
that was
true.
another thing that I was like, why can't she like be upset that she doesn't have a family or doesn't have friends? It was almost like, oh, I love this person so much. And there, she had that relationship with the girl that she really loved too, but it was always romantic.
Yeah, Sam, the painter, right? I'm assuming that's what
Sam,
you're talking about.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point that she wouldn't look at she did like kind of have a cute little thing with that old man where she would
Yeah.
see him,
With this
The
bookstore.
yeah, but I mean that was you're right that she doesn't really think like I wish I had so many friends too. I do think though, I wonder if there's some intentionality there or if it's just or if not. But I do find we're starting to have a better shift in I think society about valuing friendship a lot more and different kinds of relationships besides just romantic. I think books in general maybe put too much emphasis on the romantic relationships and not as much all the other wonderful kinds of relationships we can have. But I also think that it's a reflection of our ourselves that we put romantic relationships on this pedestal as like the ultimate perfect most wonderful. And of course, if you know, a lot of people understandably your spouse is your person, they're your other half or the person that you choose to spend your life with, whatever the case may be. But I do think there's so much value that it would have been nice if Addie just saw groups of friends together and she valued that or missed that a little bit more. Do you think it's because she didn't really ever have friends? I mean, Isabel was kind of her friend, but Isabel was kind of her friend because it was the only other girl in her village that was around her age.
Yeah.
So
That was another thing I thought of because like she lived for 300 years, right? And in my head, I'm like, well, maybe she hasn't adapted, but like, do we evolve as people because of the relationships that we have, right? Because she was way younger. She
a good
lived in a
point.
very tiny village, and the way that friendships are now is not the way that friendships or relationships were back then. So it's like it's almost like she maybe couldn't grow because you can't. I think a lot of the growing we do is based on relationships. So
Yeah,
maybe.
a lot of times people are, and this is sort of a self-involved way to look at things, but people kind of hold up a mirror to us in a sense because you learn a lot about yourself through your interactions with other people.
Yeah.
That was actually really
Yeah,
deep,
that's a
Ingrid.
really good point. And
That is
I
really
agree.
So Ingrid, that means you do like the book because it turned out that I was
Well,
like, actually, no, I'm just
well,
kidding.
and this is why I said this to you guys. Like when I first finished it, I was upset, right? I was like, oh, this sucks or whatever. But then it is a book that I've been thinking about, and it does have themes that make you think. And that is a good book, right? I mean, I just because I was looking for a plot and I
You
didn't
can
like
still think it's bad. I mean, you can.
I
I
do.
don't
I
want you
mean,
to
it
feel
is,
like.
but that's the thing. It's like I didn't like the book itself. I liked the themes in the book. I should say
Yeah.
that.
Like I enjoyed the concept. I enjoyed
Mhm.
it conceptually, but I wouldn't read it again.
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I feel like that's how I feel about a lot of V.E. Schwab books in the end. It's like the concept is so interesting and it could have been so great, but the execution, it was like a
She's
little
got
bit
another
lacking.
standalone in the works, so
Oh, really?
Does she?
yeah. I think her next thing that she's working on is another standalone.
Do you know what it's about, or should we keep that?
I think she's
also-
kept that very quiet.
Hmm.
I think all she's really said is, I am spiraling writing this book, basically. When you kind of get in this like vortex of writing and thinking about this world and then having to come back to reality, I think that's kind of where she's at, from what I've seen. Anyway.
I feel like I'll always pick up her books and just I'm like, maybe this one will be a little bit different. And
Still
it's
Vicious is your number one.
Vicious, yeah, nothing can hold a candle to Vicious.
Yeah, it's interesting because T. Kingfisher, the first book by her I read was Nettle and Bone, and I did like Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, and I've enjoyed everything thus far. There's never been something I've hated by any means, but I keep waiting for that book that's gonna beat Nettle and Bone for me. So I feel like in some ways V.E. Schwab is kind of like that for you, where you're like you read the good ones so early on. The good one as far as like for your tastes.
Yeah. Yep.
Have you
Jade,
read
whether
the horror one? Sorry, by T. Kingfisher.
Oh.
What moves
what
the dead?
moves the dead,
Yeah, did you
Or-
read that one?
or the other one? Because there's also A House with Good Bones.
No, What Moved the Dead, I think.
Yeah, I've read both, so I don't know
Okay.
why I felt the
You
need.
read both. No, you're like, oh,
I
let
read
me
both of
think. Yeah,
but not
I
the
just read
sequel.
that too. Okay.
Oh, nice.
I just read that one too, and I agree with you. Like, nothing has made me feel like I did with Nettle and Bone.
I loved Nettle and Bone. We won't
Yeah,
turn
we
this
did.
into a tea chat,
Right.
but
Sorry.
no, you're totally fine. Jade, were there other things that you wanted to
Yeah.
add?
So talking about like the themes of the book, I think that's one of the reasons why I really enjoyed this one. I mean, yeah, it probably, now that I think about it, it was lacking a little in plot. I did like the ending, like how she still kind of had the upper hand or whatever. Like that made me enjoy the ending and the plot as a whole. But the themes, like what I really liked is how we're taking these ideas of things that you would think are good. Like, sure, it'd be wonderful to live forever. Or, sure, it'd be wonderful if everybody liked me. Or, sure, it'd be great if I really connected to this. The idea that, like, my memory would be perfect. Like, wouldn't that be great? Actually, maybe it's not so great. And showing us, like, all these different things in Addie's life about why those things are not great. Kind of like turning those good ideas on their head is what I really liked exploring. And I've always enjoyed books that like explore memory, because I think about memory as like basically making us who we are the product of our own memories. And like if you don't remember certain things, then like that can't be, I don't know, represented in your personality. That doesn't really make sense. But you know what I mean? Like we are a culmination of our experiences and our memories. So I love reading books about memories and how not remembering or remembering changes our perception of things. Anyways, that's just a theme that I've always enjoyed reading. And so seeing that in this book, as far as like, what does it really mean to have nobody remember you, I thought was really interesting. And the whole thing about like her being able to remember.
Well, I really want to hear the end of what you're saying, Jade.
I know.
Almost there. I'm sure we'll get to it in just a second. Just so I know before Jade's thing comes back, did either of you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No,
No.
I
I think we pretty much touched
I've
on
said
everything.
you need to say.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure. Jade's internet.
The one time I feel like this one's lasting longer than the other ones.
I know.
And it was like it's a I feel like what we're talking about is the deeper stuff with this stuff. Oh no.
Oh,
I think she
bummer.
might have clicked out so that she could come back and have it be fresh.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'll say this. If you liked, for people that like Addie LaRue, would you give a recommendation? Okay, Jade, actually, never mind. Scratch that question I just
Am I
asked.
good?
Jade. Yeah, you were
Welcome back.
saying you explore things about people that can't remember you and the fact that and I think you're about to say that she can remember.
Oh, the fact that she has like perfect memory, but only for like the later part of her life. She like starts forgetting her early part of life, was just like so sad and interesting, because my memory kind of sucks. And it's always sucked, but like it's gotten to the point where I see people on Facebook. I'm like, I know you, but is it from high school or is it from college or grad? Like, how do I know you? Like my memory can be really fuzzy about, and I forget things that I read all the time, you know? So just the idea of like having perfect memory sounds so good, but then if something bad happens, anyways, I just love exploring all of that stuff. And there was something, the other thing I wanted to talk about was, this is very much like an artist book. The whole idea of like a muse, and how like Addie was like a muse for so many different artists. And I thought that was really interesting, how she can influence art because of her curse or whatever. But there were so many artists in the book, and just it felt like a very artsy book to me, which I thought was interesting.
I did like that touch, like her subtle way of putting her stamp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so she could finally see the impact that she had. I think that's another thing too, is when you never see the impact, then it makes you kind of ask, you feel like you're losing your sanity because maybe you're not even real, sort of a thing.
Yeah. Yeah,
I think
that whole idea was really interesting. And
Mhm.
earlier when Ingrid, you were saying like, can't she just get over it? Like she's lived for 300 years. I mean, I get where you're coming from, but my like gut reaction to that was like, but what a lonely life. Like she's all alone. And granted, that was part of the deal that she made, but like, I don't know. Well, I don't remember exactly the words that she said, but like, the idea of living forever, and if someone just flippantly said, but no one can remember you, I'd be like, oh, that's no big deal. That'll be easy. And actually, it really isn't. Like, it is so hugely impactful on her day-to-day life. Like, she couldn't have any relationships, and it just is so lonely. So I guess I'm not surprised she didn't I don't know how you get over that. How do you get over being alone forever?
I was upset she didn't adapt. You know what I mean? Like, for 300 years, it was this constant thing weighing her down. But that's what we were talking about. I think my issues with the book, it's like, that's not the point of the book, right? It's like
right.
talking about all these, people remembering or whatever. But I just feel like I was hoping she would
You wanted to
adapt
see her
and
do something.
I do think her being a spy would have been really interesting for sure.
Yeah.
I think there's a weird thing to be said too, the fact that she can't really tell her story. She can't really write out things. And I feel like that plays a role as well. But really quick, I was starting to ask Jade when your camera cut off, if for people that do like this book, is there something else that you would recommend that you feel like has similar themes or has a similar setup? Yeah, Jade, what's yours?
Can you see me? Okay. While you can still see and hear me, I wanted to talk about Tuck Everlasting. I know I asked you guys if you had read it.
Yeah, but did we mention that in the chat?
Yeah, I asked if any of you guys had read it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember.
Because I read it a long time ago. It was in middle school, so many, many years ago. This book reminded me of Tuck Everlasting, but I haven't read Tuck Everlasting in a long time, so I don't know how accurate that is, but it has some similar themes, and it made me feel similar things, and now I want to reread Tuck Everlasting. But I would recommend Tuck Everlasting to anyone who liked Addie LaRue.
Ingrid, do you have if you were disappointed by this book, read this one instead?
Yes.
Or just the general, like, if you liked this, try it. Yeah, what's yours?
This kind of, it's not that it's the same, but have you guys ever read Before the Coffee Gets Cold?
No, but I've seen it. They're really cute covers.
They're like little novellas, and it's the story is that people can go to this coffee shop and they can sit down and basically travel in time, but they can only stay there until the coffee at the coffee shop gets cold. So they can go back and see like family that have died, or they can go back and do different things, but they can't affect the future. But it's also a very character-centered story, and it's a short book, it's like a novella, but you get to see like these people's stories basically. And I thought that one was really good.
I've seen it. That's the best pitch I've gotten for it. Christy, do you have one?
Do not have anything.
Okay.
I wasn't really nothing when I was reading this, like I nothing really like came to my head like what I compared it to, so I haven't really thought about this. Yeah.
I would compare it to The Kingdom of Back by Marie Lu, which is about Nannerl Mozart, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's sister, who was a real person in history, but because of the restrictions on women at that time, even though she was just as talented, if not more so, than her brother. I feel like this is a sales pitch almost because I say this all the time when I talk about it. History did forget her for the most part because of the fact that she was a girl. And so the world lost out on what would have likely been a person that was a musical genius. They lost out on her art because of the way they viewed women basically at that time and how little they valued their contributions. But the whole book is about her recognizing that as she's getting older. And there is this sort of like fae, mysterious Narnia element to the book as well. It's kind of magical realism-y, and how that gets more sinister and darker as she's getting older and realizing the kind of trapped life that she's in. I would say it's oddly bleaker in some ways than Addie LaRue, and in other ways it's not as much. Depends on the elements you're thinking of. But if you were like, I would have liked Addie LaRue but without romance, then I think this one maybe would be appealing, and the fact that it was a real person. I mean, obviously it's not like we're reading like her journal or something, it's still fictional, but man, that book made me super emotional, and it definitely has similar themes of being remembered, and then also the art side of things through music. So definitely would recommend that one. But that one gets a lot of criticism for it being like, people will say, oh, the magic parts didn't really make sense, and I'm just like, there's no point, you know. I get weirdly like defensive about the book, which is not fair, because if you're going in wanting for the because the fantasy is almost like this Narnia thing, but then it's shifting, and in my head it's shifting because it's like the thoughts of a child, it's her escape, so it doesn't really make sense because it's all in her mind anyway. And but it's one of those books that's very up for interpretation, but has very similar themes, so I would definitely recommend that one. I think it's great. The Kingdom of Back, Tuck Everlasting, you said, and then Before the Coffee Gets Cold were the three, just to repeat if anybody thought those sounded good. Was there anything else anybody wanted to say before we wrap this up?
Yeah. Yes, if the computer will let me. There was another thing I wanted to say. Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to say, so the plot, I liked the ending and how like Addie still got to like have the upper hand. And we talked about how I didn't know that she was going to be remembered by Henry. So like those two things surprised me about the plot. The other thing is, once we knew about Henry, I thought what was going to happen was that
Oh no!
Did not let her.
Okay, go. I thought that Addie was going to give up eternal life to live a normal lifespan with Henry, and they were going to die together. And so the fact that that's not where the story went, I like that it surprised me. But that's what I thought was going to happen when we met Henry. It's like, oh, okay, so now she's going to give up eternal life, live a normal life with this guy in love, and then die. But that's not what happened.
Sorry, and I actually have one more thing as well. After finish talking
I'm
about
done.
that.
I'm done.
Another thing that stood out to me was it came when she was writing the song with the guy. How she is, you know, like the ideas came from her kind of, but no one would ever know that it was from her. And she kind of like, other people kind of like take her ideas. And I think something similar happened with Remy as well. And I don't know, I just thought that was really sad. And it would, and it's like people who aren't even Addie could probably also relate to that, because we have like so many figures in history who, like you said, there's the Mozart sister, but then also a lot of like inventors and stuff who like the ideas came from them first, but because they couldn't patent it or like for whatever reason, we attribute those inventions to someone more famous, typically male, and forget about the people who like really discovered it first.
Yeah. And in general, we kind of like, I just saw a thing the other day about this massive snake found in the Amazon, and they were like, I think it said something like, I think they were Australian researchers. They're like, Australian researchers discover this massive snake, and everybody's like, the first time white people encountered this massive snake, because the people that have lived, the like indigenous people of that area have been talking about these snakes, you know. So it's kind of like, oh, we pay attention now that these people were like, we found this really big snake. That idea as well, that it's kind of like how we look at history through the lens of the people who got to take credit, basically. There's a comedian that talks about like, did you invent it, or is it just that you were allowed to? You know, like that.
It's not true.
Yeah. So I think that's what a nice controversial point to end on.
Sorry.
No, I'm very much teasing. But yeah, the idea that there's a lot, I think just even in a simpler, no matter who you are, there have probably been times where somebody has kind of gotten to take credit for the thing that you put a lot of effort into, and they got the recognition and they get praised and you don't, for a variety of reasons. So I think that's something a lot of people can connect with as well. Lots of things in this book that are very powerful,
very thought-provoking, and good, like chat, one to chat about.
Yes, yeah. And you know, Ingrid, I hope you don't feel bad because, you know, at the beginning you were like, I hated it, but I genuinely like when there's a mixed reaction in discussions.
It gives us more to talk about.
Yeah, and it helps us see even though I love a good gush fest, you know, I feel like Christy and I had a nice gush fest about Kiki's delivery service over on my side channel with a few other YouTubers because we were just like, isn't this so adorable?
And we
so
also had
funny
and we also had a hate fest.
Yeah.
Fun.
Well,
Yes.
except for but I always appreciate when everybody has something to offer the conversation. So I hope that you feel like we didn't gang up on you or anything like that.
No, it's
It's also
fine.
interesting because we all had different degrees of enjoyment for this.
Mhm.
Like
And we
Jade, I
enjoy
liked
different
it more.
things.
Yeah. Like Jade loved it most, then Elle, then probably me, and then Ingrid. So it's like a nice
Mhm.
little spectrum.
I know.
I really liked it. It's just her and I, we liked different things because Jade really liked elements of the end. And then I was like, nah. But then other things I was like, I felt so moved by this. And Jade was like, it was really funny. I didn't know this was going to happen. So it is interesting how we both liked it, but even within that space, it was different. So anyway, yeah, I think Ingrid, you summed it up really well in saying whether somebody likes it or not, there's a lot like this book is doing a lot of things. It's trying to make us think about a lot of things. It's touching on a lot of deeper concepts. And for that reason, I think it was a really fun discussion. So thanks to all three of you for joining. For anybody that watched this in the future, everybody's links or channel links will be in the description bar down below. And yeah, this was a lot of fun. So let us know what you thought of the book. And that's it. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.